to We Need to Name This, where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academe with scholars of color. I'm Laura Ann Jacobs, and this is my co-host,
Ebony Bruce Harvey.
And today's episode is entitled, How Do I Write a Conference Paper? So we'd like to introduce an amazing woman of color scholar, Naitnaphit Limlamai, who will share her experiences with us. But first, we would like to share a little bit about her. Naitnaphit Limlamai is a doctoral candidate in the Joint Program in English and Education at the University of Michigan, where she studies how secondary English pre-service teachers take up their English education training. She specifically focuses on pre-service teachers' ideas and practice of teaching that is oriented to justice, how pre-service teachers take up those ideas, and how those ideas move across space, time, and context between university preparation and classrooms. She uses the knowledge she gains from her research, which includes studying her own teaching, to teach current and future teachers. Before returning to graduate school, Naitnaphit taught high school English for 13 years in public and private schools in Florida, Georgia, and New York. At the University of Michigan, Naitnaphit is a graduate student research assistant in the Sweetland Center for Writing and a race and ethnicity graduate student instructional consultant at the Center for Research in Teaching and Learning. She's taught first-year writing and is a teacher educator in the School of Education and in the English Language and Literature Department at Eastern Michigan University. She currently serves as the Diversity, Inclusion, Justice, and Equity Chair for the Michigan Council of Teachers of English. Naitnaphit grew up in Southern California and earned her BA from the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College. She completed the Alliance for Catholic Education program and taught high school English and French to earn her MED from the University of Notre Dame. Thank you for joining us, Naitnaphit.
Thank you, Laura Ann. I didn't realize you were going to read that, so thank you.
Well, and my camera was totally off, so if you were like, stop, I also didn't see it, so sorry for that.
Totally great.
Well, Naina, usually how we start every interview is to get to know our participants just from their point of view. So we read a bio, but there's always a story behind how we got to graduate school. Mm-hmm. So we'd like you to tell us a bit about why you decided to attend graduate school and how you came to be in a PhD program.
Oh, wow. No one's asked me that in a really long time. When I was doing my MED, actually, I at first ran away from teaching. Like, I did not want to be a teacher, and teaching just kept following me around every place. And in my MED program, I had this secondary methods class, and I loved the class so much. I loved thinking about teaching. I loved thinking about how we teach other people how to teach. It seems so metacognitive to me. Mm-hmm. And so I asked my professor to go to coffee with me. And I basically said, how do I do what you do? I want to do what you do and teach teachers. And he said something to me that stuck with me, and it said, get as much experience as you can as a teacher, and then think about how you teach that thing that the content becomes teaching. Instead of, my content was English language arts and also French. So instead of that as your content, teaching becomes the content. But in order to do that, you have to know a lot about teaching. And so I said, okay, I'm going to tuck that information away. I'm going to be a teacher for as long as the universe tells me to be a high school English teacher. And around year 11, I started getting I felt this feeling of, I'm working really hard at my teaching and trying to increase student learning. And I was just kind of plateauing. I was spinning my wheels a lot, but the result that I was seeing in my students wasn't as great as the input I was putting in. Mm-hmm. And so I thought something really has to change here, because I'm spending way too much time planning. I'm obsessing over it. Had some conversations with my therapist, and I thought something needs to be a little bit different now. So I started looking into graduate programs for teaching, remembering that conversation that I had with that methods instructor. So I started looking at different programs, and my partner is from Ann Arbor, is an alum of the University of Michigan and their School of Education, their teaching program, got his certification there. And so he said, why don't you look into Michigan? And we were living in Georgia at the time. And so I found the program, the E&E, English and Ed, and I loved that it was interdisciplinary, because I could focus on English content, which I had grown to really, really love in my time as an English teacher. But really, I'm obsessed with teaching. Like, I'm so curious about how the operation of teaching works. And so that's why, something had to change. I loved teaching. It seemed like graduate school was the next step. And now in graduate school, I mean, there are moments when I feel like, what the hell am I doing? Because so many things are new. But at the same time, like I feel a sense of like contentment that I don't think I ever felt as a high school teacher, but a contentment that's like, this is where I need to be. This is where I should be. Like there's such joy in thinking about teaching, and there's such challenge, but I always feel productively challenged. And so yeah, I think all those kind of signals tell me that I maybe should try this grad school thing out.
Oh,
So
cool. Thanks for
yeah,
sharing. I feel
yeah.
like, and this is what I always say. I'm just like, oh, I see some of me in that story, because like literally, when you are a teacher and then you go to graduate school, it's like you kind of have a similar story as like other teachers who go to graduate school. Because you're like, well, I saw this thing, or I'm like, I felt like I needed a break from teaching, but I still wanted to be in the field, or I'm saying there was something about like me not getting what I needed. How do I give other people what I didn't have? Like those types of things. So thank you for sharing your story. I really, really
Yeah.
appreciate it. So I'm going to pass it off to Laura Ann so she can get us started on our questions related to our episode today.
This episode is about conferences and things like that. So I'm going to ask you, when I started grad school, as I mentioned, like the only conference I had been to was Dragon Con. So like academia, we've got like, for English teachers, we've got MCTE, NCTE, AERA, LRA. You could go to
A, B, C,
name.
D, E, F,
Yeah,
G, H,
letter,
I,
letter,
J, K,
letter,
L, M, N, O, P.
acronym, acronym. Everybody's throwing them out like, oh, you should know what this is. And I was like, I've never heard of that before. I've heard of NCTE. Like, I don't know what these other things are. How do you, as an early graduate student, or maybe also, and also maybe as someone with experience now, how do you learn about conferences, and how do you learn about a call for proposals, which is like basically the call for applications to see if you want to apply to present at a conference? How do you learn about conferences, and how did you learn as an early graduate student?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question because I learned about conferences from other people who told me about conferences.
Okay.
And as we think about demystifying processes in the academy, I'm like, well, if I never knew that person, how would I have then known it? There's no like directory of like, year one, do these things, So the very first time I attended NCTE, the National Council of Teachers of English annual fall convention, was as a high school English teacher. And I was in a department that had this rotating funding for us to go to conferences. And my name came up as it's my turn to go. And I didn't know that we did this because I was relatively new. And so they were like, it's your turn to go to this conference. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it was in Boston. And that year it was in Boston. And that's where I did my undergrad. So I was like, well, I'll definitely take a free trip to Boston.
Right, right.
And so basically from there, once you're there, then you become in the know, because then you get on the mailing list, and then they'll send you information about, here's the next conference, here's where and how to submit proposals, and then you get on a cycle, right? So I think it's now been maybe 10, 15 years since that very first NCTE that I went to. And so now I know the conference is every November, right before Thanksgiving. The call is going to come out soon thereafter. And by MLK, a proposal is going to be due. So I have this cycle in my head just because I've done it so many times. But in terms of the very first time, I think it's really important for, because I don't know another way. I don't know a better way to let people know, because you take in so much information as an early graduate student, and it's hard to parse out what you need to pay attention to and what's okay not to pay attention to. Someone in our program said, what's a glass ball and what's a rubber ball, and what can you let drop, and what will happen once you let that thing drop. So if you let a rubber ball drop, that's totally cool. It'll bounce back. You can do it next year if you missed it this year. But if you let a glass ball drop, then it completely breaks and it might be too late. So I think it is partly on the onus of older graduate students in your program or people in your classes to say, hey, there's this conference coming up, and here's what it is, and here's what's going on. As a teacher educator, what I try to do is tell my students, or tell the students in my classes, this is what's happening. Here's what's coming up. So in the fall, the Michigan Council of Teachers of English has their one-day conference. And this year it was virtual and it was moved to the spring because of COVID. So right at the beginning of the semester, I said, hey, put this date on your calendar. I will let you know registration details. And I think as a teacher educator, as a professor, we need to tell our students, especially in the field, these are what conferences are coming up because we're in it, right? But once you get in the cycle, then you start knowing it, and then you start connecting to other conferences. So one of the things I really like about conferences, and I think this is related to another question, is that I get to connect to people who are in the circle that I'm in terms of interested in, for example, what ELA education looks like from a justice lens. So I can meet up with a small group of people outside of Michigan who are doing that, and then they tell me about conferences, or I sign up for a Facebook group. Or, I have a writing group now that's made up of these people. So just connecting with other people. But yeah, you got to get that first, once you get the first one, then I think you'll learn more about the others. But telling other people that those conferences exist, I think is one not perfect way to find out about conferences, but a way. How did y'all learn about your first, Lorianne? You said Dragon Con was a conference that you were familiar with.
Yeah, I grew up outside of Atlanta, and like sometimes on Labor Day weekend, I see people dressed as like Mario characters. I was like, what is that? And yeah, I mean, I was in college the first time I went, and someone was like, yeah, we should totally go. So, I'm a nerd, and it's kind of like a central place for nerds. I mean, I never presented, so like that's a little bit also kind of what we're talking about here is the difference in presenting versus just like attending, which a lot of I would say that there's, maybe it's unreasonable to say, there's a lot of people who don't just attend. They're like, well, if I'm not presenting, I'm not going, because there are fees. You have to pay money, right? You have to pay for your membership, and some conferences you have to be a member in order to respond to the call of proposals. And if you're a faculty member, maybe some of those fees are included in your research funding, but for graduate students, that comes out of pocket. And so I know for me, like you're talking about, how to decide which conferences to go to. I mean, for me personally, a lot of them were expenses. And then I know also I did a lot of interdisciplinary work in my first and second year. And so there were, I wasn't really sure that education conferences were for me, because none of them were like Dragon Con. And so, so I, no,
yet none of them were like Dragon Con.
I mean, we need the change we want to see in the world in that area. But, but I had, I had two anthropology professors who said, actually, like, I think your work is anthropological. And I was like, no, it's not. And they're like, okay, like we are anthropologists. We're like, we say it's a good fit. And here's the call for proposals. And this kind of, and I'll let Ebony also kind of respond. I want to make space for you to talk about how you learn about conferences, because you're a conference queen, Eb. But also too, I was like, I would read the call with these like words, these keywords, these themes. And I was like, I don't know if I do that. What does this mean? So like the next question, I'll kind of slow myself down here, and let Ev speak. But like, yeah, I think our next question is gonna be like, how do you respond to the call? So put that one in the little mind bank for a moment from now.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because like as a teacher, I did not attend conferences very often. I maybe went to one like Council for Exceptional Children conference, and I went to a conference, education conference. I can't remember the name of it, with my principal, assistant principal, and like somebody else in my department. And the thing is, like, I went to these conferences, and we went to the conference, and it wasn't like, okay, so we're going to this conference with this purpose in mind. It was just kind of like, oh, we got some funding to go to a conference. Let's pick some people, go to a conference. I went to a couple sessions. I was like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And I came home. I maybe used one thing, and then, you know what I'm saying? I think one thing I do, I think teachers should go to conferences, but I think that when we get funding at our schools to send teachers to conferences, it should be for a purpose. It should be like, okay, we want to improve blah, blah, blah at our school. We're sending you as representatives to help us do blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was not what happened. So I didn't really engage in conferences until I came to grad school. And my first conference was the ARA, which is the American Educational, whatever. I'm like, research. Okay, association. Yes. I'm like AE and I forgot the RA. Yeah. But the first time I went to AERA, I just attended as a, just a participant. I was just like, because I didn't really know. So I missed the call for proposals and all that kind of stuff, but people were talking about it. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just apply next year. And I was talking to my advisor and she was like, you know what, this is your first year. Take it easy. You don't have to do everything your first year. And I'm just like, all you got to do is say the word. Tell me to chill. I'm gonna chill. So the next year I applied for a poster session. And my advisor was like, yeah, do a poster session because then you can like meet people and talk about your research and that kind of thing. And it's not as high stakes as maybe a paper session and those types of things, which we're going to ask you questions about the differences between different sessions, which was great because then I actually end up writing an article because I met a mentor through that, doing a poster session, but then also was like a really low stakes way to just learn about different research that folks are doing and get to just talk to people about my research and get used to like saying like, this is what I researched. These are my research questions. This is what I do. This is the, you know what I'm saying? Like learning how to do the academic spiel. So it wasn't really until my second year that I kind of got an idea of like what conferences really were and like how to go to conferences with a goal in mind, right? Like I'm trying to improve this teacher education practice that I have, or I'm trying to learn more about disability studies, or I'm trying to, so these are the sessions I'm going to go to. So I do not go to conferences and just like randomly go to sessions. I go to conferences with, these are the 3 sessions I'm going to today. These are the 4 sessions I'm going to tomorrow. Oh, guess what? I'm not going to any sessions because I'm presenting and that's it. Because it gets really overwhelming. And so I really don't have a home conference. I mean, ARA is the home conference, but I found that that's a very big conference and people are very attacky, I would say, if that's a word, depending on who's in your session. So I like NAME, which is the National Association for Multicultural Education. It's a smaller conference and folks are very like, it feels like a community there. And so I do like that conference. But I haven't yet presented at like the Council for Exceptional Children because they have like regional conferences. So as I continued my conference search, I think that's the next conference that I'm going to see if like that's really my home. So yeah, sorry that was super long-winded.
No, that was real. What was really nice to hear about that, Ebony, in your process for learning about conferences and going and participating is that it's okay to participate at different levels. We don't always need to go with the intention of presenting a paper. That we can have exploratory sessions or, go as an explorer. That sounds weird, but like go to just see like what's up, right? Like what's going on, who's here, is this something that's a good fit for me? And I think you and Laura Ann both echoed this too, is that like word of mouth is an imperfect way to learn about conferences, but that's how we're all learning about them.
Yep.
And asking people what those letters mean. I mean, I heard the AERA like 1,000 times my first year, and I was like, "Era." Say the letters, and I was like, well, "What do the letters mean? Can someone tell me what the letters mean, please?"
Yes.
All those articles you read from Ed Researcher, that's that. And I was like, well, what? Can someone tell me this, please? I'm not out here looking like a dummy. Yeah.
Yes. Especially because the 3 of us are teacher educators. Like, I feel like that's so important in our classes, just to be like, listen, this is a thing you could do. This is a conference you could go to, and having that space.
Well, let me ask you this too, because I mean, like you're saying too, like reaching out to the people we work with and saying, hey, this conference is a good fit for you. That's what happened to me, right? I had some faculty members like, I think you could do it. I think National Women's Studies Association, NWSA, lots of letters. That's another one, because someone had told me you should do it. And I would read the mission. I'd say, I think that fits. But the question for me is I read that proposal and I go, I don't know what I do. I mean, I know what I do, but like, how do I make it fit this box? And like, do I have to totally change my whole project? Do I have to change my research to answer this question? Like, how do you respond to when you see that call? Is it about, I have to design a whole new project to answer this question? I know that's a no. But I have to ask, right? So, or how do you fit it? And I've worked with you a little bit, so I also know that even the language of your proposal ends up taking up the language of the call in this way that shows this deep connection. So I'm wondering what goes through your mind when you read that call and you think about finding alignment between your work and this conference?
Yeah, excellent question. So I'm thinking really specifically right now of the National Council of Teachers of English. And
Okay.
I think this can be, so I really like to go to that conference. The other one I really like is the ELA Teacher Educator Conference. The abbreviation for that is ELATE, which I get really excited about because I can say I'm elated to be attending. So I've written proposals for that as well. And I think it's a similar process, but I'm going to specifically think about an NCTE one just because that's on
Okay.
my mind right now. So the conference call and your own work, there should be like, it's a Venn diagram, right? It's like, what is the call for the conference on the one hand? Is this also going to be visual or are we just audio here?
It's visual.
Okay. Okay. And you have, this circle of like, what is the focus? What is the theme of this conference? And on the other hand, you have the circle of what's your own work. And, you need to find that really nice space, the money space in the center, the Venn diagram. While also keeping in mind the other complication is that oftentimes you will submit a proposal. For example, I submitted a proposal in January of 2021 for November 2021 NCTE. So I could almost like gestate a baby in the amount of time between when I submitted a proposal and when I present that same thing. So you have to write it specific enough so they're like, yeah, we're interested, but also broad enough that way, 9 months down the line, you can be like, wait, it's a little bit of a different angle here. And it gets easier to do the farther I've discovered it gets easier to do the farther you get along in grad school because you have more refined ideas about what it is that you do.
Yeah.
At the beginning of grad school, when you're like, I'm interested in this and this and this and this, and then you see the call and you're like, I could overlap somewhere in here, then I think it becomes a little more stressful because you don't quite, for me, I felt like I didn't quite fit into one thing, whereas now I can say, I definitely, I'm more interested in justice and teacher education and English language arts classes than I am in some of the other things I was when I started grad school. So I look for that overlap space. Where does my own research, in what ways does my own research speak to the conference call? That might be an interesting question to use as a lens when looking at the call. So in what way does my own research speak to the conference call? And then what I do is I write up Swales moves. Are y'all familiar with Swales moves? This is another, it sounds like an abbreviation, but it's a man's last name, Swales, John Swales. He actually taught at Michigan in the English department. And he had this thought that there was a standard way that particular disciplines present their information to their audiences, like genre conventions, basically. And so he studied all these articles. I think it was in Science. And he was like, there's a pattern with how information is presented. And this pattern also happens to be something that I think being a reader of proposals are also looking for when they look at your conference proposal. It's also been abbreviated as IMRAD. Have y'all heard of that? IMRAD. And that's kind of like the structure of a paper. So intro, methods, results, analysis, discussion, or something like that. I'm less familiar with IMRAD, but I'm really into Swales moves. And basically it asks some questions. So the first question is, what do we know? So what do we know about this field of study that you are in? So at the intersection of the conference proposal and your own research, what do we already know? And then from there, well, what do we not know still? Like with all this stuff that we know, what do we still not know? So I'll give you an example. So this year's NCTE conference proposal, what the theme was equity, justice, and anti-racism. That one for me was kind of like, yes, ding, 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 ding. Like they even use the same words that I used in my own research.
Right.
So I was it was very nice synthesis here. So I thought, okay, what do we know? We know that English language arts are spaces that reproduce injustice. We also know that they can be spaces that push back against those reproductions of injustice. Okay, but like how can they become spaces that liberate instead of limit? So that becomes the unknown. And that also happens to be the question that I'm trying to figure out in my own research. So you have the known English language arts classes, reproduce injustice. Well, but they also can reproduce justice. The unknown is how. How do we do that? And then your own research enters in. These are the questions that I'm studying. Here are some things that I'm thinking about, and here's some preliminary stuff that I'm discovering based on my research. And that becomes the basic structure for my presentation. Most organizations, most conferences really like to also know then what you're going to do in the presentation. Because NCTE is a conference that attracts practitioners, so usually K-12 educators, they want very, very concrete things. So they want, the conference is on a Thursday, on Monday, that teacher wants something that they can do in their classrooms. So the conference proposal readers, and I know this from being on the other end of reading the conference proposals, they want to see, well, what is it that you're going to actually do in your presentation? So, including something like participants will get into small groups, like after hearing something, they'll get into small groups. Here's what they'll think about. Participants will walk away from this session knowing these things. So kind of like listing out outcomes or objectives. So that's kind of how I think about my structure, is using those SWIL moves. So what we know, what we do not know, how am I going to investigate what we do not know? And then for conferences, how am I going to engage the participants in the session so that I'm just not reading something at them? Does that help? Think
Yeah.
about?
Can we backtrack though? Can we just talk about
Yeah.
what a call for proposals is?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thanks, Ev. Thank you, Ebony.
I mean,
And also the distinctions between the different things.
yeah. So
Like
we're talking
poster,
about call for
paper.
proposals. Usually,
Mhm.
these different organizations that we've just listed for you have a conference, and they want folks to come and present. Right. Usually, there's a theme for the year, and there's an explanation of that theme. Usually, it's a page long that says, "Okay, we're going to focus on this thing this year. We want you all to teach us and teach each other about what you know about this topic and what we need to do further research on." So then you write a proposal, like Nina was saying, you write a proposal saying, hey, my work lines up with your theme. And they say, okay, let's see. They read it. They say, come on in. Or they say, sorry, it was great, but it doesn't really fit, right? So what Nina's explaining to us is like how to make sure that our ideas and the thing that we want to present actually aligns with the conference theme that we want to present.
Yeah. And there's different kinds of proposals that they'll ask for, right? Like, I mean, you were saying earlier that when you went to ARA, you did a poster presentation. There's also paper presentations. There's a conference that I was looking at the other day has these things called interactive engage sessions, or something like that. Some have half-day workshops.
I love workshops. Yeah.
Just
Should we talk about the difference between?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, do I have to write a whole paper, a journal article to do a poster? And what's the difference? What is a talk? What is a presentation? What is a roundtable? Now, you don't necessarily have to go through each of these categories, because on a lot of these organizations' websites, a lot of them, if you kind of click on it, you'll be able to read what the difference and the distinction is. But when you have to apply, and you're talking about human gestational period of 9 months, from when you apply to when you present, how do you begin to conceptualize, I think this is a poster, I think this is a paper, I think this is a panel? Like, how do you begin to think about not only what your work itself is, but what form it might take 9 months from now?
Right. That is an excellent question. Okay, so one of the ways that I have kind of narrowed down what I like to do is I have not written a conference proposal that is the size of like a journal article. So I have the impression that that's what AERA wants. That's why I have never done it, because I'm like, oh no, that seems like a lot. So the conferences I look at, it's like 1,500 word, 2,000 word kind of max.
That's a couple pages, right? 3 to 5
pages, right?
Okay.
And I have my little template, so I know I can write a little bit about them. In terms of panel versus roundtable versus poster session, I've never presented a poster session, but I see them and I go to them because they're very much, you can like walk up to a person And it's kind of like the way I picture it, the best way I have explaining it, it's like people have either a single poster or like a trifold poster, and they stand next to their poster and they talk with people who come by, interlocutors who come by. And that seems fun because I get to listen to different parts of each presentation, right? And then I can ask questions directly to the person who's standing right there. And usually those are more conversational than if I'm on a panel or a round table or something like that. Um, did you find that too, Ebony, with your poster presentation
Yeah.
that you were
So
talking about earlier?
yeah. So it's pretty, poster sessions are pretty informal, and that's why I like them. They're like low stakes. And then you tell me, oh, hey, I can just talk about my work. Great. And you're just gonna listen. Yeah. And you're gonna ask me questions. Cool. So it's, basically you do a nice, beautiful, glossy poster. You
Beautiful.
do your graphs and stuff like that. Then you get it printed out on this big sheet, that's waterproof. It's really cool looking. I still have my posters. I got like 2 or 3 of them. And basically it's basically your research, just like you would apply for a paper presentation, but in it you have, it's like a shortened version, right? You have your research questions, you have a little bit of data. If you just started doing some work, the good thing about poster sessions, at least at ARA, you don't you it can be preliminary research. It doesn't have to be something where you've gotten all your results and all that kind of stuff, but you can be in the middle of your work, and you could do a poster session, say like, okay, so far I've analyzed this much, and this is what I'm learning about special educators, professional development preferences, because that's what I did my poster on. So it's really cool. You can throw some graphs up there, some results, some conclusions, and next steps or whatever. And it's more informal. So you talk to both professors come through there, other graduate students come through there. And what I like about AERA is that they actually have like a mentorship poster session where you're paired with a mentor. And guess what? Everyone had a mentor except me. I don't understand how I got forgotten. I'm telling you, I was the
Oh,
only
we
one
would never
without a
forget you,
mentor.
Ebony. We'd
You know
never
what I'm
forget
saying?
you.
But you know what?
Yeah.
I'm a woman of peace, so I didn't roll up in there crazy. but then I end up talking to like different people.
Lorian's giving stink eye.
I'm like I'm steaming over it.
Shade. She is.
I'm like, give
She
me the
is.
names. Not so I can do anything, just so I can think about them. Just be angry at them.
But it was super cool. It was super cool. I liked it because it was super low stakes. So yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. And I think that's a good way to think about how you want to, like, who is going to be involved in putting together the presentation is, I think, a good question to ask in terms of asking yourself, poster session, panel, paper, round table. So I'll give you an example. Like Laura Ann and I, we just put together a panel presentation for NCTE about what does it mean to be Asian American in the English classroom. And part of this was from some people I met at last year's NCTE, who are in the Asian American caucus. And so I met these new people. They all happen to be women, I think. And I had never been in a space in an English setting that was like all Asian people. As an English teacher, I was often like one Asian person in the department or in the whole building. And so you don't, Laura Ann and I both taught in Georgia. You don't get there's lots of Asians in North Georgia, but not many teachers. So I found this community, and in that community, they sent out a thing that said, calls are coming out. Does anyone want to get together to kind of present something? And there were like 7 of us who said, let's present on our stories. What does it mean to be Asian American in the classroom? And that kind of lent itself more to a panel. So there's a chairperson, and then 6 people are going to share their stories about what has it been like to assimilate, what has it been like to sometimes be the only Asian person in an English classroom, what is it like to read all these white authors, when you're Asian American, how are Asian American voices presented in a secondary English space. And that seemed to need and want a lot of voices. So that became a panel. There's another session that I put together recently about the anti-racist work we're doing in the Michigan Council of Teachers of English. And I thought, what are other people doing? Like, what are other local affiliates doing? Like, what's Wisconsin doing? What's Colorado doing? What's Florida doing? And I thought this could be a cool roundtable because we can get small groups together And then each of those can kind of brainstorm different ways. So as I think about it, it's kind of like designing pedagogy for your classroom.
Mhm.
Like you're thinking about, here's the objective that I want to achieve. What is the best way to get students engaged in that objective, and kind of matching it, pairing it. And also, like, sometimes it's like I don't have enough time to put together a panel. Like, it's the 11th hour. I forgot that this presentation was due. No one's returning my phone calls. And so it's kind of like, all right, I'll just put it in as a single person, and the conference, if they accept it, can pair me with other people. And you can meet new people that way too.
That's cool. Thank you. And I think also too, so like, I mean, the you think about like what type you apply for matches like the function you're trying to do. If you want to create dialogue across institutions or communities, a round table seems like a good fit, because
Yeah.
if you read the description of what that looks like, it allows for dialogue as opposed to a presentation, which is someone talking at an audience, right? But then Ebony brought up also another great point about like with posters, works in progress. And so even like I know on the AERA website, I've looked and it seemed like these are the things that we allow for works in progress. Here are the things we absolutely do not. Like you are not eligible to present a paper if you have not completed your, your study or whatever. Like, and we expect you to have a journal article that you submit to the repository. Is that the word? Yeah. Like, so they'll each have different standards. And I think, for me, at least, I know I've been really intimidated. I'm thinking I'm not done yet, or I don't have anything yet, or I have this thing I'm going to do, but I don't know if it's going to be finished. So I can never go to a conference until I'm done. And I think sometimes conferences are also meant to, like, obviously expose us to the rest of the field and to learn a lot more. But I mean, it's something that I'm still trying to learn about and take up, is seeing as how they can also like propel me in my own works, like, be a little boost to keep me going, either whether it allows me to be more specific in articulating what you're talking about. What is the problem? What do we know? How do we go about it? Like just saying those things really clearly. Or even just saying, I have to do this presentation. So I'm going to need to get my stuff together a little bit faster than maybe I had planned. It also can speed that along too, if that's like your style for you. So yeah, I appreciate that, Nina.
I think one thing too that someone said to me very early on, and I think it's worthwhile, if someone needs to hear it now, is that like the work that we do, we as in the people in this call, anybody listening to this, the work that you do is important. And other people are not doing it the way that you are doing it. And so I used to think that like what I'm doing, like, why does anyone else want to know about it? Like what is so special? But surely I'm drawing on other people. Surely there are other people who are more qualified to present this work in front of a group of people. And that was a lot of thinking about myself, and what kind of knowledge that I had to share with others. And if I was capable, if other people would listen to me. And a colleague, a mentor that I had when I was teaching high school, when I expressed this like insecurity to her, she said, I'm sorry that you think that about your own work, but it's important and other people need to know what you're doing. And I use that voice a lot whenever I have doubt, to say like, no, my work is important. And, there's a lot of things in the world that tell me my work is not important. A lot of those are related sometimes to my social identities, saying that I'm too loud or I'm too bold or I'm, no one's going to listen to me. I'm too aggressive or whatever. And it's like, no, people are saying that to shut me up, not because my work is not good. So there is a balance, I think, in knowing yourself and trusting yourself and also pushing back against people who would rather not hear your voice. So I think whoever, if you need to hear that.
I personally needed to hear it, Nina. Thank you. That's a very powerful message, and I think it's something that yeah, I think a lot of people that we know as graduate students, or even people who are already in their careers, I think it is something everybody needs to hear, and it's a hard thing sometimes for people to believe about themselves. So appreciate you saying that.
And I think it's the perfect way to round out our conversation.
I do too.
So it's been great, Nina, just spending time with you and sharing just really clearly how to prepare for a conference and like what a conference is and different types of conferences. So that's been like really helpful. I think just like in doing this work, sometimes, you enter academia and you don't realize like there are all these things that are required of you or that will help move you forward. Like you're not required to go to a conference, but you should, you know what I mean? And you may not know that stepping in the door. I definitely did not. So this has been really helpful for folks to say, okay, you know what? I know that applying to graduate school, one of the things I'm gonna have to do is go to a conference and present at conferences to move my work forward. Let me think about what that looks like ahead of time. Let me see those deadlines ahead of time so I can get an idea of what spaces I want to be in and I want to show my work in. So it's been really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I've loved hearing about y'all's experience, and thank you so much for asking me to share mine.
Yeah, I feel like we'll probably end up doing another episode on conferences or something. So I think we'll probably touch base with you again in the future.
We should do one on like navigating the conference. Like once you get to the place, like you've applied, you get there, and now you're like, where am I and what am I doing here? Kind of like what everybody was saying.
My go-to move is order pizza and then I eat in bed because I don't eat in my bed at home. So like I'm like, oh, this is the best part of the conference is being alone in my hotel room eating pizza in bed. And it's like, I don't think I'm doing it right. So yeah, would love to
go back to those days of eating pizza in a hotel room because all our conferences right now are online and I don't know, I want to stay online.
I can't do them. So yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Naina, so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. All right.
Thanks, y'all. It's good to see you.
Yeah. I'll message you later, Naina. Okay. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for We Need to Name This, a series where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academia. Join us for our next episode, Academic Job Market, What is a Postdoc? With Dr. Patricia Garcia. For more information, visit www.weneedtonamethis.com.